Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he had been partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend, and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, scraping, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner, as hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel has ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, nor wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the streets to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their masters into doorways and up courts, and then wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting at such a tall desk that if it had been 2 inches higher, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried out in great excitement, "Why, it's Fezziwig, bless his heart! It's old Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands together, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, and called out in an oily, comfortable, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo there, Ebenezer, Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. "Why, Dick Wilkins, to be sure," cried Scrooge. "Me old fellow apprentice. Oh, bless me, yes. Oh, he was very fond of me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear." "Yo-ho, my lads," cried Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have those shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson." You'd never have believed the way those two fellows went at it. They ran out into the street with the shutters, 1, 2, 3, had them up in their places, 4, 5, 6, barred them and pinned them, 7, 8, 9, and were back inside again before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. "Clear away, my lads," cried Fezziwig, "clear away, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick, chin up, Ebenezer." Clear away? There's nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in an instant. Every movable was packed off, as though it was dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse became as warm and snug and dry and bright a ballroom as you could wish to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the tall desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomachaches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came all the 10 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women who worked in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend the milkman. In came the boy from across the way, who was suspected of not having enough board from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door but one, who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another. Away they all went, 30 couple at once, hands half round and back the other way, up the middle and down again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there, but all top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his red-hot face into a pot of porter, which positively hissed. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, as this scene faded, to hear a hearty laugh. It was an even greater surprise when he recognized it as his nephew's. "He said that Christmas was a humbug as I live," said Scrooge's nephew. "He meant it too." "More shame for him, Fred. I hate him," said his wife, Scrooge's niece by marriage. She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking, capital face, a ripe little mouth that was made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw. Altogether, she was what you would have called provoking, you know, but a perfectly satisfactory, perfectly satisfactory. "He's a weird old devil, to be sure," said Scrooge's nephew, "and not so pleasant as he might be, but his offences bear their own punishment, and I'll have nothing to say against him. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself always. Here he takes it upon himself to dislike us, and won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He don't lose much of a dinner." "Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner," said his wife, and everyone else agreed. And they must be allowed to have been competent judges, for they'd just finished dinner, and with the dessert upon the table, were sitting round the fire by lamplight. "Well, I'm very glad to hear it," said Scrooge's nephew, "for I don't have much faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper?" Topper clearly had his eye on one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he said that a bachelor was a wretched outcast with no right to an opinion on the subject, at which Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one with the lace tucker, not the one with the roses, blushed. After tea they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about when they sung a glee or catch, I can assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away in the bass like a good 'un, and never swell those large veins in his forehead or get red in the face over it. Later they played at forfeits, for it's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. Stop! First they played at Blind Man's Buff. Of course they did. And I'll no more believe that Topper was blind than I'll believe he had eyes in his boots. For the way he went after that plump sister with the lace tucker was an insult on the credulity of human nature. Knocking over the firearms, tumbling into the chair, bumping into the piano, smothering himself in the curtains. Wherever she went, there went he. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. If you'd fallen up against him and stood there, as some of them did, he'd have made a feint of endeavouring to seize hold of you that would have been an affront to your understanding, and then sidled off again in the direction of the plump sister. She often cried out that it wasn't fair, and really it was not. But when he caught her, when at last In spite of all her silken rustlings and rapid flutterings past him, he got her in a corner whence there was no escape and had to guess who it was. Then his conduct was most execrable, for his pretending he didn't know her, for his pretending it was necessary to touch her headdress, and further to satisfy himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring upon her finger and a certain chain about her neck. Oh, it was vile, monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it when, another blind man being in office, they were so very confidential together behind the curtain. But he was early at his office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only get there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he'd set his heart upon. And he did it too. The clock struck 9, no Bob. 1:15, no Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. His hat was off before he got through the door. His comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as though he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," said Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming in here at this time?" "I'm very sorry, sir, I am behind my time." "You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please." "I'm very sorry, sir. It's only once a year. It shall not be repeated, sir. I was making rather merry yesterday." "Now see here, my friend. I'm not prepared to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," he said, leaping off his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the ribs that he sent him staggering back into the tank, "and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." Bob trembled and got a little nearer the ruler. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary, and I'll endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Now, make up the fires, and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. He had no more intercourse with spirits, but lived in that respect upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed that knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.